The champagne glass shattered before and even registered the pain. One moment, she was standing beneath the crystal chandeliers of the Grand Marquis Ballroom, 6 months pregnant and radiant in her black gown, her hand resting protectively on the swell of her belly. The next, her cheek was burning, her vision blurred, and the entire gala had gone silent. Jobe Natt stood before her, his hand still raised, his face twisted with the kind of rage only entitled men wear when confronted with consequences. "You think you can just show up here?" he spat, his tuxedo immaculate, his arrogance untouched by the 100 pairs of eyes now locked on them. "After what you tried to do to my family? You're nothing but a—" Anne's knees buckled. The marble floor seemed to tilt. Her vision tunneled as she pressed one trembling hand to her stinging cheek, the other instinctively cradling her unborn child. Around them the elite crowd, CEOs, politicians, socialites, stepped back in synchronized horror, forming a perfect circle of judgment. No one moved to help. No one dared. But then the air changed. The massive glass doors at the ballroom entrance swung open with a force that made the chandeliers tremble. Through the golden light spilling in from the street, a motorcade of black SUVs lined the curb, engines still running, men in dark suits flanking the entrance like sentinels. And walking through it all, moving with the calm precision of a man who had never heard the word "no," was Jun Moore. His undercut was sharp. His three-piece suit sharper. The ink crawling up his neck, dragons and Korean script, was visible even from across the room, a warning written on skin. His eyes, cold and unblinking, locked onto Jobe with the kind of focus that preceded violence. The crowd parted without being asked. Jun Moore didn't run. He didn't shout. He simply walked, each footstep echoing like a countdown, until he stood between Anne and the man who had struck her. His hand, warm and steady, rested on Anne's trembling shoulder. His other hand moved to her belly, protective, possessive, absolute. "You just made," Jun said softly, his voice carrying across the silent ballroom like a blade drawn from its sheath, "the last mistake of your life." Jobe's face drained of color. The arrogance cracked. And for the first time in his privileged existence, Jobe Natt understood what it meant to be afraid. The gala had just become a reckoning. Subscribe to see how this unfolds and comment where you're watching from. I will love to say hello to you just to know how far our story is going. And had almost refused to come tonight. She'd stood in front of the mirror in their penthouse 3 hours earlier, her reflection framed by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Manhattan skyline, and wondered if she was strong enough to walk back into a world that had once devoured her whole. The Natt Corporation's annual charity gala was the kind of event that made or broke reputations. Old money. New power. The kind of people who smiled with their mouths and calculated with their eyes. Jun had appeared behind her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "You don't have to go," he'd said, his accent softening the edges of his words. "We can stay home. Watch terrible movies. Eat ice cream until the baby kicks in protest." She'd smiled despite herself, covering his hands with hers. "I need to do this. I need to prove to myself that I'm not the woman they threw away anymore." And she wasn't. The woman reflected in that mirror wore confidence like armor. Her sleek updo was perfect. Her black gown flowed over her curves and her 6-month belly like liquid night. The diamond necklace Jun had given her, a wedding gift, caught the light with every breath. But beneath the elegance, beneath the poise, her heart still remembered the rain. 15 months ago she'd been nobody. A secretary dating the heir to the Natt empire, foolish enough to believe Jobe's promises. When she'd gotten pregnant with his child, she'd imagined a future filled with love and legitimacy. Instead, his mother had handed her an envelope of cash and his father had called security. They'd thrown her out of the Natt estate on a night when the sky had opened up and rain fell like judgment. She'd miscarried on a street corner 3 hours later, alone and broken, her screams swallowed by thunder. She would have died there if June hadn't found her. He'd been driving through that neighborhood on business, the kind of business that required unmarked cars and men who didn't ask questions, when his headlights caught her collapsed form. He'd carried her to his car, taken her to a private hospital, stayed with her through surgeries and fever dreams and the hollow grief that followed loss. "Why are you helping me?" she'd whispered one night, weeks into her recovery. "Because no one helped me when I needed it," he'd answered. "And I promised myself I'd never let that happen to someone else if I could prevent it." Their relationship had grown slowly, carefully, like trust rebuilt from shattered pieces. He'd never asked for anything, never demanded, just offered safety, then friendship, then something deeper. When he'd proposed 6 months later, she'd said yes not because she needed rescuing, but because she'd found home in the spaces between his silences. And when she'd discovered she was pregnant again, this time with June's child, the fear had nearly broken her. "What if I lose this one too?" she'd sobbed into his chest. "Then we'll grieve together," he'd said simply. "But you're not alone this time. You'll never be alone again." Now, standing in the Grand Marquis Ballroom with his hand on her belly and his body between her and Jobe Natt, and felt the full weight of that promise. Jobe was breathing hard, his eyes darting between June's face and the armed men now stationed at every exit. "You don't know who you're dealing with," he hissed, trying to salvage his bravado. "My father is the chairman of Natt Corporation. We have lawyers. We have." "You have nothing," June interrupted, his voice still quiet, still deadly. "And it's time everyone here understood exactly what kind of man the Natt family raised." He raised his hand, a simple gesture, and one of his men approached with a tablet. June's fingers moved across the screen with practiced ease, and suddenly the massive display screens positioned around the ballroom, meant for the charity auction's promotional videos, flickered to life. The crowd gasped, and recognized the location immediately, the street corner where her life had ended and begun again. The dashcam footage was grainy but unmistakable, time-stamped from 15 months ago. Rain sheeted across the lens. And there, illuminated by headlights, was a younger version of Anne, collapsed on the pavement, her arms wrapped around her stomach, her face twisted in agony. "I want you all to see something," June said, his voice amplified now through the ballroom sound system. 15 months ago, the Natt family threw this woman, pregnant with their grandchild, into the street. She miscarried alone in the rain while they celebrated another profitable quarter. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Phones appeared, recording. The footage continued playing, showing Anne's desperate attempts to crawl toward shelter, her body giving out. Jobe's face had gone from pale to gray. "That's not, you can't." "I saved her that night," June continued, ignoring him completely. "I took her to the hospital. I held her hand while doctors fought to save her life. And while she recovered, I did what I do best. I investigated." The footage on the screens changed. Different camera angle. Same street. But this time the timestamp read 3 hours earlier. A silver Mercedes pulled into frame, driving erratically, swerving between lanes. The license plate was clearly visible. Anne's breath caught. She'd never seen this. The Mercedes mounted the curb, striking a man crossing the street. The impact sent the victim flying. The car didn't stop. It accelerated, disappearing around a corner, leaving the man motionless on the pavement. "Hit and run," Jun said flatly. The victim was Ramon Gutierrez, a line cook and father of two. He survived, barely, but spent 8 months in a coma. When he woke up, he couldn't remember the accident. Couldn't identify the driver. The screen froze on a close-up of the Mercedes's license plate, then split-screened with DMV records showing the registered owner, Jobe Natt. "But I could," Jun finished. The ballroom erupted. Shouts. Accusations. Cameras flashing. Jobe lunged toward the nearest exit, but Jun's men were already there, blocking his path with crossed arms and expressionless faces. "Wait." Jobe spun, his eyes wild, searching the crowd. "Dad. Father. Tell them this is fake. Tell them." Chairman Natt stood near the auction stage, his silver hair immaculate, his tuxedo pressed to perfection. For a long moment he simply stared at his son, his face carved from stone. The calculation happening behind his eyes was visible to everyone watching. The cost-benefit analysis of a man who'd built an empire on knowing when to cut losses. "I have no son," the chairman said finally, his voice cold and precise. He turned to his assistant. "Call our legal team. Prepare a statement distancing Natt Corporation from all personal actions of Jobe Natt, effective immediately. He's terminated from all positions and removed from the family trust." "Dad." Jobe's voice cracked. "You can't. I'm your only—" "You're nothing," his father said, and walked away without looking back. The circle of elite witnesses tightened, phones still recording, history being written in real time. This was the footage that would dominate tomorrow's news cycle. The fall of a dynasty's heir, caught on camera at his own family's gala. The glass doors opened again. This time it was NYPD detectives in suits, flanked by uniformed officers. Leading them was District Attorney Catherine Pierce, a woman whose conviction rate had made her a legend in legal circles. She walked straight to Jun, shook his hand with professional courtesy, then turned to Jobe. "Jobe Natt," she said, her voice carrying authority that needed no amplification. "You're under arrest for vehicular assault, leaving the scene of an accident, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to commit fraud." She nodded to the screens still showing the hit-and-run footage. "Mr. Moore has been very cooperative with our investigation. He's provided extensive documentation, including the dashcam footage you're all watching, toxicology reports showing cocaine in your system at the time of the accident, and evidence that you framed Ramon Gutierrez's nephew for the crime to cover your tracks." The officers moved forward with handcuffs. Jobe struggled, his entitled rage finally giving way to something like fear. "You can't do this. I have rights. I have." "You have the right to remain silent," one officer said, snapping the cuffs closed. "I suggest you use it." As they dragged him past and Jobe's eyes met hers one last time, she saw recognition there, and shame, and the dawning understanding that actions had consequences even for men like him. And said nothing. She simply placed both hands on her belly and watched him go. Jun's arm wrapped around her shoulders, steadying her as the adrenaline began to fade and reaction set in. "Let's get you to the hospital," he murmured. "Make sure the baby's okay." She nodded, suddenly exhausted, and let him guide her toward the exit. Behind them, the gala had dissolved into chaos. Reporters shouting questions, guests forming camps of gossip, the chairman's security team working damage control. But and wasn't looking back anymore. The private hospital room was quiet, all soft lighting and beeping monitors. The ultrasound technician had spent 20 careful minutes checking every measurement, every heartbeat, every flutter of movement. When she'd finally smiled and said, "Baby's perfect. Strong heartbeat, good position, no signs of distress," and had cried for the first time all night. Jun sat beside her bed now, his hand engulfing hers, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. The tattoos on his neck seemed softer in this light, the dragon less menacing, more protective. "There's something else," he said quietly. "Ramon Gutierrez, the man Jobe hit, he's 4 floors up. Still dealing with physical therapy, still rebuilding his life. His nephew Victor has been in prison for 14 months on charges Jobe fabricated to frame him for the accident." Anne's eyes widened. Victor was innocent? Completely. Jobe paid witnesses to lie, falsified security footage, planted evidence. Victor took a plea deal because he couldn't afford a defense attorney and didn't want his uncle to suffer more legal fees. Jun's jaw tightened. "I've already contacted the DA. With the evidence I've provided, Victor's conviction will be overturned by morning. He'll be released by noon tomorrow. Can we be there?" Anne asked. "When he gets out?" Jun smiled, the expression transforming his usually severe features. "I was hoping you'd ask." They met Ramon and his family in the hospital's garden courtyard the next afternoon. Ramon was in a wheelchair, his left side still weak from nerve damage, but his eyes were clear and grateful. His wife, Isabella, kept one hand on his shoulder while their 2 daughters, 8 and 10 years old, clung to each other nearby, suddenly shy. "I don't know how to thank you," Ramon said, his accent thick with emotion. "You gave me my nephew back. You gave my family justice. You survived," and said softly, kneeling beside his wheelchair despite her belly. "That's what matters. And now the man who hurt you will face consequences." "What will you do now?" Jun asked. Ramon glanced at his wife, some unspoken conversation passing between them. "The hospital bills took everything. Our house, our savings. Isabella's been working 3 jobs. I want to work again, but who will hire a line cook who can't use his left hand properly?" Jun pulled a business card from his jacket. "I own several restaurants in the city. We need a consultant who understands what it's like to rebuild after trauma. Someone who can help design menus and kitchen systems that are accessible for people with disabilities. The pay is good. Health insurance is better. And you'd be helping create opportunities for others like you." Isabella's hand flew to her mouth. Ramon stared at the card like it might disappear. "You would do this? For us? You suffered because a coward ran away from his mistakes," Jun said simply. "I'm just making sure he doesn't get away with it twice." Later that afternoon, they stood outside the correctional facility as Victor Gutierrez walked through the gates, his release papers clutched in one hand, his eyes squinting against sunlight he hadn't seen without bars in over a year. He was 23, tall and lean, with his uncle's kind eyes and his mother's stubborn chin. Ramon wheeled himself forward, and Victor collapsed to his knees in front of the wheelchair, his shoulders shaking with sobs. "Tio, I'm sorry, I should have fought harder, I should have." "Show me, Joe," Ramon whispered, his good hand in Victor's hair. "You're free now. That's all that matters." And watched from a distance, Jun's arm around her waist, and felt something shift inside her chest. The weight she'd been carrying, the shame, the anger, the grief, didn't disappear. But it became bearable. Sure. Transformed into something that could build instead of break. "I want to do this," she said suddenly, I want to help people like Victor. Like me. People the system throws away. June looked down at her, understanding immediate in his eyes. Tell me what you need. 6 months later, the building was ready. Second Chance's home occupied a renovated brownstone in Brooklyn, its facade painted a warm golden yellow that caught the afternoon sun. Inside there were 12 beds, a commercial kitchen, a nursery, counseling offices, and a legal aid clinic. The staff included 2 social workers, a nurse practitioner, a lawyer who specialized in domestic violence cases, and Isabella Gutierrez as the house manager. And stood in the common room, one hand on her lower back, the other supporting her now 2-week-old daughter asleep in a wrap against her chest. The baby, they'd named her Hope, had arrived 3 weeks early but healthy, screaming her arrival into the world with June's eyes and Anne's stubborn chin. The first resident arrives in an hour, Isabella said, checking her tablet. Pregnant, recently homeless, fleeing abuse. Just like, she stopped, glancing at Anne apologetically. Just like me, and finished gently. That's exactly who we're here for. June appeared in the doorway, his suit replaced with dark jeans and a simple black shirt, the tattoos on his neck fully visible. He'd taken a step back from certain aspects of his business in recent months, delegating more, choosing legal ventures over shadowy ones. Fatherhood had softened some of his edges, though the steel underneath remained. There's someone at the door, he said. For you. And followed him to the entrance, Hope still sleeping soundly against her heartbeat. A courier stood on the steps, holding an envelope. And more? This is from Rikers. Inmates can send approved correspondence. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The handwriting was shaky, rushed, desperate. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't even deserve to write this letter. What I did to you, what my family did to you, there's no apology big enough. I took everything from you because I was a coward. Because I thought money and names made me invincible. Prison has taught me what you already knew. Power without character is just cruelty wearing a suit. My father hasn't visited once. My mother sent divorce papers to protect the family name. The lawyers I thought I had disappeared the moment the evidence went public. I have nothing now except time to think about every mistake I ever made. And my biggest mistake was you. Not because I lost you, but because I never saw you as human until it was too late. I know you're married now. I know you have a daughter. I saw the photos from the charity event where Second Chance's home was announced. You looked happy. You looked free. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even want it. I just wanted you to know that you won. Not because I'm in prison, but because you turned your pain into purpose while I let mine turn me into a monster. If there's a chance I can help, a statement for your residents about entitled violence, testimony for legal cases, anything, I will. It won't erase what I did. But maybe it can stop someone else from making my mistakes. I'm sorry doesn't cover it. But I'm sorry anyway, Jobe. And read the letter twice. Then she folded it carefully, slipped it into her pocket and looked up at June. He wants redemption, she said softly. Do you want to give it to him? She thought about the woman in the rain. The woman who'd lost everything. The woman who'd been saved by a stranger's compassion and rebuilt herself from grief. She thought about Hope, sleeping peacefully against her chest, unaware of the darkness that had preceded her light. She thought about Ramon and Victor and Isabella and every person who'd been broken by someone else's cruelty. I want to give him a chance to be better, and said finally. Not for him. For every person he might influence if he actually means what he wrote. If his story can prevent one person from making his choices, then his suffering has purpose. Jun nodded slowly. That's more grace than most people would offer. Grace, and said, kissing Hope's downy head, is what saved me. It's only fair to pass it forward. She pulled out her phone and composed a response, her thumbs steady on the screen. Jobe, I forgive you. Not because you've earned it, but because carrying hatred for you would poison the happiness I've fought to build. If you want to help, start by being honest. Write your story. Every entitled choice. Every moment you thought your name made you immune to consequences. Send it to Second Chances Home. We'll use it in our workshops on recognizing abuse and entitlement. And when you get out, if you get out, there's a bed here if you need it. Not because I've forgotten what you did, but because everyone deserves a second chance if they're willing to do the work. That's the difference between us now. I chose to build from my rock bottom. Make sure you choose the same. She hit send and felt the last chains of her past finally break. That evening, as the first residents settled into Second Chances Home and Hope nursed peacefully in the nursery, and stood on the brownstone's front steps watching the Brooklyn sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. Jun joined her, his arm around her shoulders, his chin resting on top of her head. Do you think he'll actually change? He asked. I don't know, Anne admitted, but I've changed. And that's enough. Somewhere in the city, Jobe Natt sat in his cell and stared at her response until the words blurred. Somewhere else, Ramon Gutierrez prepared his first accessible menu design for Jun's restaurant. And in a dozen different corners of the city, women who'd been thrown away began hearing about a place that offered second chances. The cycle was breaking. The story was changing. Anne and Moore, survivor, wife, mother, founder, finally understood that the best revenge wasn't destruction. It was building something beautiful from the ashes and inviting others to warm themselves by the fire. Hope stirred against her chest, yawned, and settled back into sleep. Jun's hand found hers. The sunset deepened, and the world, for once, felt full of possibility instead of pain. YouTube outro. Soft, emotional music fades in. And that's how Anne turned her darkest moment into a beacon of hope for others. From being abandoned in the rain to building Second Chances Home, she proved that your past doesn't define your future. Your choices do. Jun gave her safety when she had nothing. She gave herself purpose when she could have chosen bitterness. And Jobe? He got exactly what entitled cruelty deserves. Consequences. But here's what I want to know from you. Music swells slightly. If you were Anne, would you have forgiven Jobe? Or would you have let him rot in prison without a second thought? Drop your answer in the comments below. I'm reading every single one. And speaking of comments, where in the world are you watching from right now? New York? London? Lagos? Tokyo? Seoul? Drop your city below and I'll personally say hello and shout out as many of you as I can in the next video. I love knowing how far our stories are traveling. Upbeat transition. If this story hit you right in the heart, if you felt Anne's pain, Jun's protection, or that satisfying moment when Jobe got dragged out in handcuffs, smash that like button and let me know. And if you're new here, welcome to the family. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because we drop stories like this every week. Stories about justice, redemption, love, revenge, and people who refuse to stay broken. Next week's story? Let's just say it involves a billionaire's secret daughter, a fake engagement, and a wedding day confession that destroys an entire family dynasty. You do not want to miss it. Music builds to climax. Until then, remember, Your past may have tried to break you, but your future is waiting for you to build it. Choose grace. Choose growth. Choose to be the person who lifts others up. I'll see you in the next one. Stay strong. Stay fierce. And never let anyone make you feel small.